Okay, I've been working a lot of swing shifts and overnights and everything else the past couple of weeks. We're kind of shorthanded right now, so I haven't had an opportunity to do one of these. But there was a film I watched maybe a week or maybe a week and a half ago. It doesn't really matter, but the name of it was Rememory. Um, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it too highly unless you were a fan of Tyrion Lannister or Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones. He happens to be one of my favorite characters, so I was going to enjoy the film anyway. But when I was, it's about, just to give a basic plot synopsis without giving a whole lot away. It's about a scientist who invents a machine that can replay your memories in crystal clarity. Uh, but there's a line near the beginning. It's almost like, a video of your memories, like being able to watch your memories on YouTube, for example. There's a scene in the beginning where there's this line where he's talking, and he says that, our memories somewhat shift and change over time because when we think about things in our past and when we look at things in our past, we're kind of filtering them depending on the way our personality changes over time, the way age factors in, and a number of other things. And I was thinking about certain things in my life, nothing really major, nothing really traumatic, that embarrassed me really badly when I was a lot younger. They barely phase me at all now. And there was a kind of a discussion online that I was thinking about that kind of ties into that, because I know that when I was in Quackaholics Anonymous, they're completely, totally obsessed about your past, but they're constantly feeding you a narrative, where everything that you've ever done throughout the course of your entire life is totally all your fault, or how you played a part in things that, no matter what, how little of a bit of control, I guess you could say, that you had over a situation, somehow or the other, you're somehow magically to blame for all of that. And I was thinking about how when I first got out of AA, how I guess because I had been swallowing that narrative for so long, I couldn't see anything in my past whatsoever that had one single good memory in it. I couldn't see anything except all my failures, all my fuck ups, everything that I had ever done incorrectly or wrong. And I think it took actually some time away from the cult before that I could actually look at some of those memories with a little bit of objectivity. And I began to realize that I was accepting blame for a lot of things that didn't have anything to do with me whatsoever. They were things that were far beyond my control. They were things that, that a lot of other people had a great deal of a hand in creating certain major catastrophes in my life, Not to mention, level of toxic. Can't talk this evening, I guess, because I'm tired. But level of toxicity, I guess I can't get it out, among family members that really factored into a lot. There was a family member not too long ago that passed away, and can honestly say that nobody, whether they wanted to admit it or not, was too heartbroken about it. I know I wasn't. They were a terrible. They was a terrible person. I mean, they ruined so many people. They deliberately brought misery in everybody's life, and they deliberately crushed people. And I don't even know if they were kind of aware of it, if they were insane or what it was, but they just fed off of people's agony. They just fed off of making everybody miserable, and just. And I remember constantly having to be judged so harshly for being the worst thing in their eyes ever was for you to be a drunk or to, anything that fell short in their so-called perfect standards or whatever. But they made everybody miserable. I mean, everybody. And I was thinking about different moments in my life where certain situations where they played a major role in just ruining everything for everyone. In AA, when I was going through all these so-called inventories, and when I was going through all these steps and all this bullshit, with all these various sponsors and everything, they were constantly telling me that I played a part in all of this, that I somehow needed to accept blame in all of this. And at the time, to give you an idea how brainwashed I was, it never occurred to me to say back to these fuckhead sponsors. I mean, you do realize some of these situations that you're wanting me to accept total blame for, including physical abuse, and really, traumatic physical abuse at that. I was 9 and 10 years old. I mean, it kind of seems really, that seems so utterly ridiculous to me now that I could have ever entertained this idea that I somehow played a role in stuff that when I was 9 or 10 years old, it had absolutely nothing to do with me whatsoever. And of course, I heard in a lot of AA meetings when I used to go there, you have to remove the word blame from your category, and you have to not focus on what other people did. And when I had brought up right near towards the end, I remember talking one time about the fact that everything is not my fucking fault, in spite of what you people are teaching in here. They wanted to throw this line at me about, yeah, but what good does it do to blame people? What good does it do to blame people? I've noticed, not just in AA, but in our society in general, it's almost become like a crime to blame somebody else for your problems, or blame somebody else for things that have happened to you. It's almost like, because of AA, I've noticed there's this thing, you hear shit like, don't play the victim, don't be a victim, don't act like you're a victim. And I think that's actually a very poor way of looking at the situations in your life, because you're actually assuming yourself to be much more powerful than you really are. I mean, you would have to think, well, of course, AA is incredibly narcissistic, but it actually demonstrates to me just how narcissistic it is if you think that everything that ever happened in your life, you somehow was in total control over the entire situation, independent of everybody else, independent of everybody else's actions. People don't live in vacuums, okay? You don't live in some kind of vacuum where every choice you make is as indistinguishable as flipping a fucking coin. I mean, everything you do in life is not just wholly independent of you, and not without interactions, of just you alone. I mean, how many people have had bad coworkers that have totally ruined jobs for you, or bad bosses, or how many people have had certain family members that have, brought you down, or done abusive things to you, or done horrible things to you? How many people have gone to school and tried to keep their head down low when they're a little kid, and some bully has to come around and screw with you? This idea in life that somehow or the other, if you just, what is that bullshit they say all the time, if you just do the right next indicated thing, nothing bad will happen to you, is a total crock of shit. I think one thing that I didn't realize in that narrative when I was buying all that brainwashing garbage is, there's downright nasty, horrible, evil fucking people in the world that will inflict harm on you. And the idea that this cult teaching is saying that you can't even blame these people for what they do to you, I found that very, very destructive for me. And it took me a long time of being out of the cult before I could actually look at my own past with some level of objectivity, without a whole lot of bad feelings, and without a lot of emotional baggage, and without a lot of this feeling that I must somehow be one of the worst human beings that ever lived on the face of the earth, over things that had nothing to do with me whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it just occurred to me not too long ago that I've been out of the cult long enough now that I realized the depth of emotional baggage that kind of got imposed on me by being in there. It's like the longer I'm away from it, the more I can examine it without so much emotional attachment, to the point that I think it's like I realize more and more just how many damaging aspects there are to being in AA, other than, what's obviously on the surface. It's really weird how every so often, even now, like when I do something that's actually pretty good, every so often, occasionally, it pops into my head that I should feel guilty for taking some credit for something, or taking some pride in something. I mean, there was some of that already present growing up in a really heavily Catholic household, where that's kind of a factor anywhere, or at least the type of Catholic household I grew up in, where there's kind of a strict authoritarian disciplinary type thing behind it, especially if you ever went to parochial school with those really crazy nuns that would, terrorize you. But it's kind of interesting how liberation kind of comes in small dosages. And you don't kind of appreciate it until you can see things in retrospect. Hindsight being 2020 and all of that. Not too long ago, I did something, without going into a lot of detail, that I wanted to actually, that I did. I felt really proud of that. I had put in the work for that. I had bent over backwards to get it done, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's this little nagging voice in the back of my head that's saying, you don't deserve this. You shouldn't take credit for this. You're really just a bad person overall. All that voices in your head stuff that I think is greatly exacerbated by sitting around and listening to that narrative they push down your throat, where you can't take any pride in yourself and you can't have any positive feelings about yourself, and you can't look at your own life and say, I've done some major things in my life that's not necessarily, bad, destructive, or whatever. And you can take credit for that. It's one of the things that I think creates the environment of constant relapses and suicides and things like that. If you can't take credit for the fact that you've actually made the decision to change your own life, it leaves you with a feeling of hopelessness. And at the bottom of every relapse I ever had, I think really at the core of it all, the thing that drove me the most was the fact that I felt hopeless. I didn't see any hope in the immediate future. I mean, to give you an idea of even now how I'm still deprogramming and everything, if I say, and I'm going to say it out loud here to prove it, I quit drinking. I chose to stop drinking. I chose to stop screwing my life up. I'm the one that put forth the effort to make sure I didn't go back to drinking. I'm the one who put the bottle down. Nobody else did it for me, and I'm proud of that. To say that out loud like that, there's still this thing in the back of my head that almost feels like there's some karmic entity that's waiting out there to come after me and hold me down and pour liquor down my throat. It's complete and utter bullshit. But the deprogramming process, I think it's almost like an awareness that these nagging voices in your head, sometimes the outside world itself, and the negative reaffirmations you give yourself is what creates this shit. It's not really real. I mean, there's no scientific evidence whatsoever to say that just because I just said I'm proud of not drinking, and I'm the one who quit drinking without any religion or any cult or anything like that. There's no scientific evidence that says that's going to mean I'm going to get drunk out there in the future somewhere. Anyway, I think I stayed on point. I mean, like I said, this has been an insane week. I've worked about 60 hours, and then I was overnight the day before, and then I had to come back early in the morning today. Don't want to do a whole nother video on that, but hopefully I can make another video of you guys pretty soon. So that's about all for now.